Hello and welcome to our podcast today. Why has the gender pay gap not seen any improvement? It is a complicated question, and there's lots going on around this conversation, both here in the United States and internationally. So we're really excited you're joining us today to learn a little bit about compensation if you don't know anything about it, and to learn about what's creating this inequity that we have been dealing with for so many years and doesn't seem to be getting any better. So I'm here, joined today here with my colleague from Circle Strategies, Pamela Brown, and we're going to take you through a conversation about this topic. I'm going to give a little bit of a background of this topic so everybody can be on the same page, and then we'll jump into a whole series of questions that Pam and I are going to toss around and figure out how we can maybe solve this problem. Now, a lot of you may or may have not heard of the Equal Pay Act that was passed in 1963. We are talking 60 years ago. And so many years have passed that we've had this law to try and bring equality between how much men are paid and how much women are paid. And there has been some movement, some good, significant movement. But unfortunately, women are still finding themselves behind when it comes to being paid equally as men. Now, there's lots of different issues that we're going to tackle that contribute to this. But one of the things that strikes me and Pam so significantly is how long it's going to take if we just continued on this path to get men and women to be paid equally. And one of the things we're going to toss around towards the end of the conversation is the pay transparency laws that are being implemented in countries around the world to help bring equality in terms of how men are paid and women are paid. And this is not, the inequality of how people are paid is not just a US issue, it's an international issue. And so we want to make sure that that is clear for the people who are joining us internationally, that this conversation covers the whole world, not just people locally in the US. So, Pam, if you could just start off with telling us a little about who you are, how you got to where you are, and all the experience that you've had in such a variety of different companies.
Well, Cliff, thank you, first of all, for inviting me to come and speak to your fans and audience.
My fans. That's funny.
I have, I've been in the HR field my whole career. Do I want to say 30 years? And part of that learning has always been in the compensation realm. When you have to administer performance reviews and pay increases and look at your hiring practices and wage ranges. And I think that when I look back on my career, I was a civil rights officer for a government contractor for over 2 years, and there I learned about sort of all of the statistical mathematical
The
analysis.
details.
Yeah, the details that go into figuring out how many men, how many women, and then kind of digging deep into the different classes and what the median pay ranges were for people. And so that gave me kind of my first little introduction, like, how is
Mm.
this working and what's going on here? And, what are we doing with the data? Back in I think it was the early 90s, what you did with the data was you submitted it to someone, they made an EEO report, no one really dug deep into it, and everybody thought, oh, we've crossed the finish line. Following that, I've had many years of experience working in restaurants, hotels, engineering companies, manufacturing companies, and I think that the real differentiator in understanding the whole compensation business is if companies are made aware that these types of compensation analyses need to be performed, you need to kind of figure out Do you have a problem or not? And you need to have a regular timetable to sort of check in on
Mhm.
that area of your business and make adjustments as appropriate.
Now you've also worked your last career
Mhm.
post was with a very large company,
Right.
international company
Mhm.
that had many different locations. And so,
Exactly.
how did you handle compensation there at an
Yep.
organization? First tell us a little bit about it, the
Yep.
company, so people can understand what it was all about.
Yep. I worked for a division of Koch Industries, KOCH, not Coca-Cola, and they're into chemical technology, and so their business was water filtration systems. They had a global operation. They had plants in several plants in the U.S., China, and Germany, and sales offices spattered around the globe. So if I had to count it up, I'd say probably I have experience in 15 different countries, and compensation is so totally different outside of the United States. And this has to be 5, 7 years ago, Cliff, when different countries have almost like in Italy, you have a range that is decided by the government, and they call
Mm.
it some type of union. So here's your range. Everybody knows what the range is and what your classification is, so you're within those parameters. So I think that
For every company.
yep, so I think that they do it
Ah.
well. There are similar, sort of levers in France
Mhm.
where people have incredible job protections, compensation protections, and so I believe in those countries, it's much easier to understand and that companies will not have the significant challenges that we have in the United States. The United States is really just breaking ground now to
Mhm.
figure out, like, oh, should we be looking at that? Even though all 50 states have an Equal Pay Act for men and women, as well as we have the federal, that 1963 Equal Pay Act that I'm not sure has really helped us, but it's out there, and quite frankly, it's helped women who want to take it to the next step and file EEOC charges, MCAD charges, or civil suits.
Mhm. And I do think, though, that uh, there is a lot of onus that falls to the employer
Oh,
in ensuring that
mhm,
there is equity. Just because we have a law to help protect the women,
mhm, mhm,
they shouldn't have to be responsible for putting the employer
mhm.
on notice.
Right.
It should be the company's responsibility, like you said, to have a regular practice for
Exactly.
evaluating.
Exactly. So in my experience, I mean, for a best practice, if you're doing an EEO report every year, you run your gender report on compensation and see if there are any outliers or something that stands out. So you have a record. You know what? We looked at it. We constantly reassess it and we make corrections when we need to. I mean, I've got clients who have actually asked me to do that when I've been hired, in to evaluate their HR department. One of the first things they want to know is, do we have any compensation issues, Pam? And that
Right.
is one of my standards that I go to evaluate it.
Great. Well, let's start off by covering the topic of what is the wage difference and what does that
Mhm,
mean?
mhm,
Statistically, I'll just throw this out there so folks know that right now, according to a Pew Research study of 2022, men who earn $1 equate that to women who are earning 82 cents. So, right there, statistically,
mhm,
it's a difference. It was a lot lower, it has
mhm.
increased, but it's still far off from being equal.
Oh,
So let's
absolutely.
share with people listening about what is the wage difference. What does that mean?
What that means is when I look at it, and you can look up all of these phrases in Google and get some definitions. What I see, Cliff, is when I look at it, it simply means that over time, when you look back, I mean, men were the breadwinners 50 years ago, 60 years ago, and women were entering the workforce. Some had been there all along, but men really were the prominent group of wage earners. So, if there were any studies done, I think they were done back then. Women started entering the workforce, becoming more educated. Women had more options than being a housewife and staying home. So as women entered, they got their feet wet in the working environment. I believe companies were looking at them with their background and experience to hire them. And there may have been, you know, discrimination in the
Mhm.
way they looked at it. Nobody shared compensation. So women didn't really know, like, how much should I ask for? What should I do?
Right.
And so it was led by what I believe was a male dominated workforce who made the rules. So over time, now women will have gaps in their resumes where they took time off to raise a family. They did some
Mhm.
traditional work, they have an education, and they want to come back into the workforce. I've seen historically where companies will discount that for sort of a years of experience and think they can pay women less.
Mhm. And what's your thoughts on that from a
Well,
practice as an employer who's doing that?
I think that it over time, it has changed, in the 2020s, if you will, but I think that companies need to be educated, and they need to change their, job offer position from, what's the, lowest level of base compensation we can get away with
Mhm. Yep.
to, what's our range?
Right.
Where does this person sit with the experience and the range of the role? I mean, if we don't move into that type of an environment, women will never catch up.
Exactly. I do think what you touch on is a very big difficulty for employers is the idea of the job and understanding exactly what the job is in order to put a
Mhm.
value on it.
Right. Exactly.
And in HR, we call that a job analysis
Mhm.
to fully understand what this person does.
Mhm.
So let's talk a little bit about what that is and what that entails
Mhm.
and why that's important.
Mhm. I think when you look at sort of the job analysis, you really have to compare apples to apples within the same group. So if you've got, 20 programmers, that's a simple task. If you've got 6 VPs of different divisions, those kind of have to be aggregated and done separately in a job analysis. And I think really what you're looking for is, is there a weight to a variety of factors that would go into it? So is there a seniority system so you get
Mhm.
more credibility or more points per se if you've been there longer? Is there a merit-based system that over time you may get a larger increase, which could separate the gender
Mhm.
because of performance? Is there any system that measures quality or quantity, which could give you a higher or lower pay increase over time? And as long as you're working with any factor other than gender, you're able to make that evaluation.
And then it's really talking about apples to apples and
Exactly.
comparing it.
Exactly.
Exactly.
You have to kind of get everything in an equal space.
So, for somebody who's never done a job analysis before, take us through a little bit of what's going on in your head when
Mm,
you are approaching a job where somebody gives you the job description.
yep.
It may have not.
Mhm.
It may have been reviewed 5 years ago, maybe
Right.
a year ago.
Yeah.
What are some of the things you're thinking of when you're looking at a job and you're actually doing the analysis?
Right. I think that every company needs sort of a standard template. Like, what are the different factors that we're going to look at? Are we going to look at two or three things, four things, eight things, 10 things? And so once you set that up and you can fill it in by using the job description, but I also like to interview the person
Mhm.
that I'm speaking with because oftentimes the job description is a bunch of words on a piece of paper and you need to understand, "Oh, yeah, Pam, 3 weeks out of the year, I travel to China." Well, there's some value to that for
Oh,
somebody
yeah.
to do that. Or, you know what? I work on the budgeting and the forecasting of the company so they can project their earnings and their stock value. I mean, so there's a lot of high-powered
Mhm.
executive things that go into it. I think that you want to be able to manage like things so that you can evaluate it over the big picture. So it's really more about meeting people, understanding the organization. Where does this position fit in the organizational chart? The higher up in the organizational chart, I think the more complex the
Mhm.
analysis needs to be. And I think that it's important to sort of get everybody together on the same page, but the organization has to be committed to
Mhm.
wanting to understand it and wanting to make a change.
Exactly. I mean,
Mhm.
clearly, this is a huge initiative that's undertaken for the whole
Right,
organization.
right.
So,
Go ahead.
uh, just before we leave the topic of the job description, what are your thoughts about the difference between a job description that lists what people are responsible for doing
Mhm.
versus the job itself?
You know, that's a tough one. I think it's a combination of both. I
Mhm.
don't think one way or the other is really going to, get you the detail that you need to understand what the person is doing.
Mhm.
I often find that the higher up in the organization, it's more about driving results. Lower in the organization, it's more about doing the tasks.
Right. And I think getting those tasks right because
Mhm,
uh, sometimes uh, it becomes a task list of what
mhm,
somebody has to do
mhm.
versus focusing on what the job is accomplishing
Right,
and how it's contributing to the organization. And I think you said this earlier, understanding the level of complexity.
Mhm,
And some people have parts of their jobs that are very complex. They don't
right.
do it very long and they
Mhm.
don't think about it and don't put it on the job description. But
Exactly,
it's very valuable. And
exactly.
it's valuable when it comes to figuring out what I'm worth and
Mhm,
what I should get paid for.
exactly.
I think that's something that gets lost. So doing a job analysis is very valuable. It does help bring those things to the surface. It
Mhm.
also helps people in the department and the senior executives who are making the compensation decision understand truly what the value is and what they're doing
Exactly.
versus assuming this is
Mhm.
what somebody is
Well,
doing.
and I think that, you start off with a job description and a job posting, people apply, they come in, and it's not always what you thought it was that
Right.
they're going to be doing. Things change over time. So I think clear communication as well as an understanding of what the results are and the deliverables,
Hmm.
that makes all the difference.
Agreed. Agreed. So that great explanation of why doing a job analysis is
Mhm,
important and helps set a company up for success in figuring out what the right amount is to pay.
mhm,
What do you think is contributing to wage inequality? Well, first off, let's start off with what is wage inequality?
mhm.
Let's just talk a little bit about that
Yeah,
because there are different definitions about it.
right, and I think that it comes down to you can go and read many, many reports on wage inequality. When you look at the internet or pick up a newspaper, you will find little pockets of it. But I think what it really means is they're looking at aggregate data of women and men in a certain population. And what is the gap? So statisticians run around and figure out everybody in the town of Boston, women and men, who makes what, and then they do some statistical calculations. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, which a lot of companies use to kind of figure out where they should be, also has statistics around that. So I think that it is an analysis of a bigger group of people. It's not
Hmm.
a small group or one company at a time, but they're looking at sort of the impact of a socioeconomic
Hmm.
arena.
But at the ground level or the
Yeah,
company level,
right.
when a company is looking
Mhm.
at their group of employees, just let's take an example for a company that has 100 employees.
Right.
They, I think you're suggesting they should simply look to see who's in the jobs,
Mhm.
who's a woman and who's a man,
Yep.
and, and are they paid equally, and
Right.
be able to explain why they're not.
Exactly. There's a
So that kind of jumps to, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt you, but it
that's
jumps
okay.
to the next question, which is what prompts wage differences?
Mm.
But before we get to that, you were going to say something.
I think I was going to simply say that by grouping jobs of similar likeness, and there's an easy way to do it. The EEOC, when you kind of code people and set them up, you have to decide if they're professional, technical, sales, skilled, unskilled labor. If you can kind of bucket people like that to look at your analysis across the board, then it's much simpler to kind of find groups of people in similar jobs so that you can then analyze it.
Hmm.
And I think
And
that
then do your job analysis.
exactly, and I think that there are some wonderful tools that are available free to organizations and companies. I don't know, 5, 6, 7 years ago, when Massachusetts had their Equal Pay Act come into
Mhm.
place, all companies were required to do this, what people were afraid of, like, "Oh, it's too difficult," analysis, but it's really so very simple. You fill in a table that the Attorney General advertises on the Massachusetts Department of Labor website. You just put the job title, the pay, years of experience, and they have a few other things. And within minutes, you have your analysis. And really, I use that for clients because it gives me a quick overview and a quick snapshot to see, do we need to dig deeper?
And is it safe to say that lots of states around the country have
Oh,
similar kinds of analysis?
probably do. But
Mm.
you know what it is? I think that the state of Massachusetts hired someone to be a statistician and to create a table that you could just plug this into for a quick look. So I think that there are probably lots of tools that are out there.
Yeah.
Payroll companies and consultants will have all kinds of tools available for you, but there's also many free things that you could look at just to see if
Mhm.
your company has a potential liability. And that's really what we're trying to hone in on here. Because, as I was
Right.
getting ready for the podcast, I said, oh, what am I going to be talking about? And, where are things going today? And the first thing that comes up is Google in July of 2022, so not even a year ago, paid 118 million to settle a compensation issue between women and men. Now they're embarking on more of a pay transparency process so people don't have to feel like they need to get litigious.
Exactly. That's the shocking thing about it. That is what's
Mhm.
so shocking about it. I started off talking about the Equal Pay Act, which was 60 years ago.
Yeah.
All right. Google wasn't even around 60 years ago.
Mhm.
And an organization like that, who is so prevalent in everybody's lives,
Exactly.
in 2022
Yeah,
was in trouble. They had
exactly.
to make things right. They
Right.
didn't follow the rules around compensation.
Mhm.
So I think uh, the next question that I'm going to ask is that was a good segue into the question about what's wage discrimination.
Mhm.
And what I come to understand about wage discrimination, it
Mhm.
isn't that the company is intentionally
Oh, no.
saying, "Oh, Pam, well, I'm going to pay you, this much dollars, and
Mhm.
Cliff, you're going to get that much dollars, and I'm going to intentionally discriminate against you." There are a lot of other things that are going on around the wage discrimination.
Mhm.
So share with us a little bit about some of those things that you have seen in your
You
work.
know, it really is about paying an employee or a group of employees,
Hmm.
at a lower rate than a white male. I mean, I think that's really kind of the big umbrella, and this equal pay compensation really it affects and impacts women, but it also impacts people of race, religion, and disability.
Hmm.
So it's a broader group, but I think that when we're looking at the equal pay, starting with women, I think gets you the broader group of people that may be impacted.
Yep.
And then I think that it is on the company to set up a practice on a regular basis to analyze that.
I agree, and not only that, in terms of managing your data and
Mhm,
making sure you're doing it correctly, I also think it's important that uh, we recognize that the inequality and the possible discrimination that
mhm,
could occur
yeah,
also has to do with access.
mhm,
So, when I talk about access, what I'm specifically saying is that because you fall into a specific category, and let's
mhm,
just say it's women,
yeah,
there are issues about everybody should have the same access to promotion or to a higher
mhm,
level job or the ability to learn more so that they could advance.
mhm,
Now, that's not direct discrimination. There's a lot of bias that occurs, and there's a lot
mhm,
of implicit things that happen that women don't get that access that men do. The one that comes to mind that I've spoken about with others before has to do with women inherently just not knowing how to ask for more when it comes to negotiating for a higher salary.
mhm,
They always have not had that opportunity to ask, or they don't feel comfortable
mhm,
asking. And that is a behavior change. It's not necessarily something we have to do legislatively, but
mhm,
companies can recognize that
mhm,
the men who are looking for a salary increase ask for the salary increase at
mhm,
a rate much, much higher than women do.
mhm. You know, I hear what you're saying, but I often think that new laws and new regulations and new ways of assertion by individuals, including women mostly, um, are going to change that landscape, Cliff,
Mhm.
because the state of Massachusetts has banned, recruiters from asking employees, what are you currently making? So they can then use that to make some mathematical
Right.
calculation on how to move people forward in the organization. So it's almost incumbent on an organization to be able to have those types of salary ranges or bands or ideas on what the pay range is going to be when you interview somebody. So you
Correct.
can't go into these meetings any longer with sort of you just don't know. So a company has to be prepared. Companies in the US are not at all um, open or comfortable, or they have to get more training and education on how to share compensation with candidates and internal employees. Here's the bands, the ranges. Here's how you go from one thing to another. But what I've discovered over time and over my career is women were much more in my early career 30 years ago. I think that women were much more accepting of whatever the job offer was. They were happy to have a job.
Right.
Today, people feel older, they feel empowered, and
Hmm.
they feel like, you know what, if you want to make me a job, I want the best job offer you can give me.
Exactly. I think there's more understanding
Hmm.
today of what's out there
Hmm.
and
I would
what's
agree.
out there around the world.
Right.
And as a woman specifically,
Hmm.
uh, they're able to see how women in different countries get access to jobs, how they're
Hmm.
treated, what time off benefits they have, what accessibility they have to
Hmm.
promotion and things like that.
Right.
And so you're right, there's much more of an awakening or an awareness. And I
I like
think
that awakening. That's really where it's at. Hmm.
somebody commented a minute ago, thank you for your comment about knowing your worth.
Hmm.
Um, and I think that's really at the heart of what I was
Hmm.
saying earlier, what we were saying earlier about being able to ask. You can really only ask if you know your worth.
Right.
And so you have to do your own little self
Hmm.
uh, job
You have to do your
analysis.
homework. Right.
Do know your expertise, know what you're
Hmm.
able to contribute to the company. I think that is also very important. And then knowing that and adding tax on top of it, because
Yep.
it's not just salary. Here in
Right.
the United States, it's not just
Yep.
salary; it's compensation. So
Right. Correct.
uh, let's shift our conversation just a little bit to uh, what some of the things that we talked about earlier, where there are large pay gaps. And do you have some commentary or want to share of, what do you think are some of the large, what are the causes of large pay gaps?
Um, I think there are two things. Number one, over time, if you've been with a company for 10 or 20 years and you started off low, you're going to get your 3 and 5% or 2% or 0%, maybe some bonus or incentive. But when you start from behind, you can never catch up.
Right. And it
I mean,
just
that's what I
continues to
think
grow.
is the biggest issue. I think that recruiters and companies are much more alert today to understand that there is a wage discrimination, pay inequity, and that people need to be paid fairly for the job. So I think that
Exactly.
that is, as people enter the workforce, I mean, my daughter is graduating with her MBA. She's interviewing, and I have,
Congratulations.
thank you, and I have told her, you ask the recruiter, what is the pay range?
Hmm.
You know, that you can't come up with a number. It may put you under or over, so you'd like to be educated on how their compensation system works.
And it does put the recruiter on notice that
Mhm.
you're paying attention and
Right,
you're advocating for yourself. So
right.
good for her. That's awesome. One piece of this puzzle, we've talked a lot about what the liability is to organizations and what organizations should do to help close the gap. One of the pieces to the puzzle is pay transparency.
Mm,
So we've operated in the United States for many, many, many years
mhm,
with the understanding and communication from the top down to all
mhm.
employees, whether they adhere to it or not, is to not discuss
Oh,
your
it's not
salary.
discussed. Do you know sometimes even in clients, they want me to put that in a handbook that
Wow.
they don't
Yeah.
want you talking about your pay, but we know you can't tell them that.
No, no, you absolutely can't do that.
Mhm,
So I think the important piece here is that what is happening internationally.
mhm,
And there are countries, specifically in the EU and the UK, that are passing laws that
mhm,
are requiring companies to disclose
mm.
their compensation. So everybody
Absolutely.
knows what everybody's making.
Exactly.
And there are a lot of issues that bring to light when you are now required to do that.
Hmm.
Uh, the first one I think about is, what is the process that a company has for keeping track of their compensation? Like, how do they even know to communicate what compensation is?
Right. I think that companies use a variety of tracking mechanisms. And I would suggest that if companies want to be on their game and be progressive, that they need to have a payroll system or a HRIS system that can capture a lot of this
Mhm.
history for them rather than keeping it on a napkin or a notebook. And every year you've got to run around and figure out what happened when and how. So I think that organizations that can build a compensation function, you don't need a compensation expert for everything, but what you do need
Exactly.
is you need to be able to have an accurate history of pay increases, promotions, merit increases. What was your increase for? Was it a CPI increase? And then if you can get that far, you've got some good history to look at to understand where people are in the compensation programming of your organization. But you just
Exactly.
can't keep it on an Excel spreadsheet or a napkin anymore. It's too complex.
No, it's too complex. And then, most importantly, even if it's just a simple system
Mhm.
where you pay people and
Yeah,
maybe you give a merit increase at the end of the year, it just could be as simple as that. And
right.
then maybe salespeople get, uh, you know,
Something
a,
else.
a bonus or
Yep.
a commission or something else. That could be
Mhm.
your compensation program, which is very, very simple. The problem with not keeping track of it, which I think is what you're suggesting, is that if now the government comes along and says,
Oh, right.
okay, Circle Strategies, you now need to let all of your employees know what they're getting paid. Well, that's
Mhm,
great. That's easy to do. Yeah, what's in our payroll system? We'll just put it on a
mhm,
nice piece of paper and tell everybody what they're getting paid. But
mhm.
immediately after that, once everybody finds out what they're getting paid, all the questions start. Like, well, I'm getting paid this, and John, who works right next to me, gets paid this, which is the same for the same job. But I want to now learn more, and I want to enhance my
Mhm,
ability so I can earn more.
mhm,
And what's the process for doing that? What's the link between
mhm,
where I'm at now and where I'm going to be?
mhm,
And that's what's complicated, I think,
mm,
what you're saying,
mhm.
is having the base data
Well,
to get you to where you need to be.
right. I also think, Cliff, it's career pathing. I think that employees need to understand resources available to them in the organization that can help them improve their skills, get cross training,
Right.
use tuition reimbursement, and really the onus is on the employee to find out what resources are available at an organization to help them advance. And many times companies don't take advantage of telling people what that is.
Hmm.
Yeah, or giving them, like, here are these free things you can take online. Here's this, here's that. And what happens is people get frustrated. They look for another job. They find out they can make 25 or $30,000 more by making a job change, and they don't give their current employer a chance after they've invested time, money, and experience
Exactly.
to be able to grow.
Exactly. And many states here in the United States offer grants to employers
Mhm,
to provide training.
exactly.
Many countries around the world also do that as
Right.
well. And I think that's the learning opportunity for employers to recognize that there are resources out
Mhm.
there that you can tap into to give people an
Absolutely. I mean,
opportunity.
because I'm so familiar with the state of Massachusetts, you can file to get a training grant, free money to train your employees on a variety of things. I mean, it's so, um, It's so open, but people just don't know how to find it.
Exactly. And it is very easy to file, and
Mhm.
you can get up to $30,000. That's a lot of
Is that
training money.
30,000 per person?
No, it's for the whole company
Oh,
per year.
really? Hmm.
It's a lot of money.
Mm.
But besides that, I think as we finish up here, the issue of pay transparency from the legal side,
Mhm.
because we're a global uh, set of organizations today, meaning we could be a 10-person company and have two
Right.
people who are working in Asia selling for us.
Mhm.
Um, that's a global organization. And
Right.
if suddenly Asia passes a pay transparency law, we're now saddled with having to deal with that here in the United States, which is exactly the situation Google is in. They're an
Mhm.
international company with employees everywhere, and
Mhm.
the countries that they're in have already passed those laws.
Mhm.
So if I'm now going to have to be transparent in XYZ country, what are my employees here in the US going to think?
Mhm.
So I do think that this is going to spill over to the US. We might
Right.
not pay those laws. We might not have those laws change here in the United States. We might not have a pay transparency law, but I think operationally we're going to be
Exactly. And what
having
that
to do it.
simply means to me is if the organization has to comply with 35 different countries that all require them to have this pay transparency, they are going to be forced, by definition, to have sort of a global program to explain it to everybody. Employees
Exactly.
will demand it. Employees will raise their hand if they're not being included in that. And who needs somebody to start a lawsuit or a class action lawsuit
Hmm.
to uncover inequities of the past? You
Which
just
is
don't want it as an
no,
organization.
like Google did that. That's what they
Mhm.
had, how they had to settle to
Yep,
pay those. So
exactly.
great. Well, Pam, thank you. It was great to hear your expertise and what's going on in the world today with the
Excellent, Chris.
compensation. Let's see if anybody has any specific questions that came through to cover um, before we wrap up.
Great. Thank
And
you.
you're very welcome. Um, and I think what I wanted to just say in closing for uh, pay equity, just specifically here in the United States, is that uh, there are many, many, many opportunities for women, and many, many women have taken those. And we can see that by the shift, at least in the last 15 to 20 years,
Mhm.
of women taking such senior uh, executive roles, leadership roles, roles within the government that they didn't have before. And what's unfortunate is, yes, they've been able to uh, get very, very far, and they'll continue to get far, and they'll continue to improve those
Mm.
differences. But
Mhm.
the pay is still behind,
Right.
and I don't know what else to suggest that could help that. Um, but I do think pay transparency is going to be important.
I would totally agree.
Great. All right. Well, thank you all for participating and hearing what we had to say about compensation. And I hope we were able to share some good insight today. So thanks and have a great rest of the day.
Bye now.